So here we are at the first shelf here. Just do a quick pan with the camera phone all the way down to the bottom. And so we'll start up here with some of the books on books. If we turn this way, you can see that we're going to work our way down this wall. So up here on the top is really my OG collection of books on books, or some of them anyway. These are the new books on books. The old books on books, and by old I mean anything in hardback that predates 1950 or so. The old books on books are farther down the wall, but we're starting with the new books on books. And for me, it was Nicholas Basbane's A Gentle Madness that sort of started my love of books on books. And I remember reading a library copy at some point in my early 20s and enjoying it, being absolutely enchanted with all the fun stories. Fun, interesting, morbid, shocking stories that Basbane presents. And I set it aside when I finished, or rather I returned it to the library and went hunting for more, was unable to find more in my local library system. And it wasn't until I was in a local independent bookstore in Kitchener-Waterloo while doing my undergrad when I saw this Europa edition of Bound in Venice, The Serene Republic and the Dawn of the Book by Alessandro Marzo Magno. And this is a book about the book trade and book printing and book binding business in Venice. And that, I would say, sort of really sparked my interest in books on books. And I've read this 2 or 3 times now. But if we start down here, we have one titled Book Row that I actually haven't fully read yet. Just because it's a little bit slow, it's a little bit piecemeal. There isn't really a strong narrative to it. It's definitely set up as something you dip into every now and then. And so this is an anecdotal and pictorial history of the antiquarian book trade. And I would add, in the United States. It's definitely focused on America. This is by Marvin Maudlin and Roy Meeder. And so there's that one. And then as I pull this one out, I realize we're on to one that I haven't read. This was a gift, and it was a gift that I put on my shelf when I received it for my birthday this year and apparently forgot about until this very moment. The Library of Fragile History by Andrew Pettigrew and Arthur Derwendwin. And I remember getting this and thinking, oh, that looks amazing. Obviously, it's a book on the history of libraries. There's many books on the history of libraries. But this one I haven't read. And so I should remember it's here and read it in the near future, in the next few months, before my birthday comes around again and this friend gets me another wonderful book. And then I'll have 2 wonderful books from her that I haven't read. And this next one here, The Madman's Library by Edward Brooke Hitchings, is a gift from that same friend who got me the library. This was perhaps my birthday in 2022, or maybe it was a Christmas gift. Either way, it was one I really enjoyed. I think I talked about it here on the channel when I first read it. It's called The Madman's Library, The Strangest Books, Manuscripts, and Other Literary Curiosities from History. And it's got a lot of great illustrations in it and a lot of great stories. You know, poison books, books bound in human skin, mad collectors, and all sorts of strange and wonderful curiosities. And I think the cover illustrations just absolutely give you a good idea of just how fun the stories in this book are. And then we have a cheap reprint of a classic. This is the Bibliomania, or Book Madness, containing some accounts of the history, symptoms, and cure of this fatal disease, in an epistle to Richard Herber, Esquire, by the Reverend Thomas Frognall Dibdin, Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. And so this is, exactly as it says, it's a treatise on the madness that is book collecting. And it's quite fun. It's obviously an older work. Let's see if there's a publication date in it here. Well, 2004, that's not going to help us. But yes, first published in 1809. So it's one of the earliest books on book collecting, and something I would highly recommend if you fall down that rabbit hole of books on books. Then we have this fun one here, Bookbinding, Its Background and Technique, 2 volumes bound as one, by Edith Deal. And this is a good one if you're interested in the craft of bookmaking, how a book comes together, the history of the craft. And I think there's even, some illustrations and some instructions on how you yourself might attempt bookbinding. Of course, it requires specialized tools, which I do not have, but it certainly does inspire me, or it did when I read it. It inspired me to want to go out and attempt some bookbinding, and I did a little bit, but very poorly, and I think I would have to invest in some decent tools to do anything decent. And then we have The Book on the Bookshelf by Henry Petroski. This one I like the cover on. Once again, sort of a history about books on shelves. I believe this is the one where we start off with, what the original bookshelves looked like, how books used to be chained to the shelves in monasteries, how books used to be shelved the other way around. Of course, now we put all our spines outward so we can see the title, but the original way to shelve books was what we would consider backwards, because the chains would have been, connected here, and this would have faced the back of the shelf or the wall, and the pages would be outwards. And then we have Alberto Manguel here. I have History of Reading in paperback, and Manguel has published a number of books with just absolutely delightful essays on his own reading experiences and some of the books that he loves. And this one of his best. And then there is Packing My Library, which is a collection of essays about books he's read, books in his library. The subtitle here is An Elegy and 10 Digressions. We have his reading diary. If you don't have room in your case for 12 of your own favorites, a reading diary would be the best substitute. So it's a year of favorite books. And then we have Into the Looking Glass, essays on books, reading, and the world. The next here we have something called Dark Archives by Megan Rosenblum, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin. And I recall doing a video on this book when I first read it. It's a little bit macabre, certainly. I think I had read maybe The Madman's Library, and this showed up as a recommendation somewhere online, maybe on Amazon or something, as being, similar in topic. And it is quite literally what it says. It is a book about the history of books bound in human skin. So if you're looking for something a little macabre, here's the one for you. I enjoyed it. It does give you the creeps in some way. And then we have here Long Live Latin, The Pleasures of a Useless Language by Nicola Gardini. And this one, maybe it's shelved a little bit out of place, but I decided that it does belong with the Books on Books. Although it's not directly a book about books, it is a book about the Latin classics and sort of the joy that Gardini finds in being able to read and understand Latin. And I myself have never studied Latin, but this book made me want to. And it's sort of in the back of my mind, one of these days when I finally conquer the French language, maybe Latin is my next language that I attempt. But I'm not very adept with languages, so I could be 70 years old before I try to pick up any Latin. Then we have Marginalia, one of my absolute favorites. I've got all these tabs in there, and I've added my own marginalia, my own annotations. And so this is by H.J. Jackson, and it's a book about the history and the practice of writing in the margins of books. Jackson starts with, I can't remember if he starts, but at some point he talks about, marginalia in medieval manuscripts and marginalia in early books, right up almost to the present, about how we still continue to annotate books. And it's just absolutely delightful, especially for someone who loves to make my own notes in my books and who loves finding other people's notes. It's an absolute plus for me when I buy, an older book like this, 100 years old or more, and there is the notes or the book plate or the inscriptions or dedications of past owners and readers. And then we have Alan Jacobs' Breaking Bread with the Dead, A Reader's Guide to a More Tranquil Mind. I guess he's the author of another book titled How to Think, but this is one I greatly enjoyed. He talks about how the reading experience is a way of interacting with the minds of past authors. We're quite literally having a conversation with the dead when we read, and I enjoyed those essays very much. Then we're back down to Gentle Madness. We also have Baz Bain's Patience and Fortitude, which is along the same lines of A Gentle Madness. This one is a roving chronicle of book people, book places, and book culture. So once again, a lot of great stories about book collecting and book collectors and readers over the centuries. Slide that back in. And then we have one by Lawrence and Nancy Goldstone. This is called Warmly Inscribed, The New England Forger and Other Book Tales. And so this is another book about, curiosities of readers and collectors, little anecdotes and stories. And one of the largest focus of this book is the New England Forger, book forgeries and dupes, and attempts to make sort of false books and forgeries, essentially, because certain books do sell for high amounts of money, and if you can make somebody believe that an inexpensive or a cheap book is in fact an expensive book, and you get away with it, then you can make a lot of money. And I recall liking that one very much. I have two more by Lawrence and Nancy Goldstone. Used and Rare. Oops, and I'm reflecting in the cellophane. Used and Rare, Travels in the Book World. So more of their anecdotes, adventures, bits of history from their own lives and from things they've learned, stories they've heard. And then Out in Flames, Lawrence and Nancy Goldstone's book on, I'm trying to remember the name of this gentleman here on the cover. It is about an early religious work that was Almost all the copies were burned because it was considered heresy. Servetus and Calvin. And you can tell it's been a while since I read this one, and perhaps I didn't retain quite as much as I had thought. But I remember where I read this one. I remember I was sitting in the park thinking at this very moment, a new cabinet is being sworn in a couple kilometers away at Rideau Hall. So I can tell you where I was reading it, I can tell you what was happening around me, but I couldn't tell you too much about the contents of the book. And so moving down a level, we have my In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. As you can tell, it's been well read and is even starting to yellow a bit, as paperbacks do. Next to this, we have The Chelsea Away by Andre Morose, which is next to the Proust because, as it says here, it is a Proustian parody. It's been translated into English by George D. Painter, and it's got drawings by Philip Julian. And so it is, in some ways, sort of written in a Proustian style. It's got Proustian themes, but it is parodying sort of the social interactions you would find in Search of Lost Time. Then we have a novel by Fontaine, Effie Briest, and this one has almost the exact same plot as Madame Bovary, hence why it is shelved next to Madame Bovary by Flaubert. And I have to say, I prefer Effie Briest to Madame Bovary because my favorite Flaubert is actually Sentimental Education, which I think is a far more interesting and far better plot than Madame Bovary. And I'm just noticing something seems to be missing here. Clearly something has gotten misshelved. I'll have to figure out where it went. I must have misshelved it when I moved the books. But there should be Bouvard and Pichet next to Sentimental Education. And I don't see it. So it must be somewhere on one of these bottom shelves. But after Flaubert, we are moving into Agnes Repplier, one of my favorite essayists from the late 19th and early 20th century. She was an American woman who wrote extensively about literature. A lot of her essays on literature focused on social issues, and I would say in terms of her politics, she seems to have been somewhat traditional and probably what today we would consider sort of centrist. You know, she's not too far to the right, she's not too far to the left, but she does voice her opinions. And so we have first here a collection of essays titled In the Dozy Hours. And next to that is a reprint, a very, very cheap reprint. There's even someone's glue fingerprint called Books and Man. I should give you the publication dates, the printing dates of these editions. So In the Dozy Hours, let me double check here. In the Dozy Hours is 1894. This one doesn't matter too much because that's a reprint. We have my copy of To Think of Tea. It is clearly a library discard. This one is really fun because it literally is all about tea. The history of tea in England, the pleasure of drinking tea. We even have an interlude on Dr. Johnson's love of tea. So if you're in any way into Johnson or just tea in general, this is a great one. And let's see, yes, I have the 1932 edition here. And then we have one titled Counsel Upon the Reading of Books. And this isn't completely Repplier. It has an essay by Repplier in it. So I've read Replier's essay, and there are essays by others that I think I read some of them, and others I've left alone for now. You can see I've got an old receipt in it as a bookmark. because some of them don't necessarily interest me as much as others. This one is from 1900. Next to it we have Ruplier's collection, A Happy Half Century, in somewhat dirty gray cloth here. And this is 1908. Yeah, so that is a 1908 edition of A Happy Half Century. And then we have Points of View and this beautiful leather. They're a matching set, but Varia's front board is detached, unfortunately. It was attached when it came to me, but it was hanging on by a thread, and it has since detached itself when I made attempts to read it. And I believe this is 1896, maybe? Yep, 1896. And Varia is 1896 as well, or it could be 1895. They're from around the same time. Then we have Under Dispute, also by Ruplier. And this is one of my more recent acquisitions. This one was a Christmas gift, and it's from 1924. Then we are finished the Ruplier, and we have some more paperbacks. So we have one that I haven't read yet. This is one by Nicholas Basbanes, the same Basbanes of A Gentle Madness and Patience and Fortitude. And this is his book on paper, the everything of its 2,000-year history. And then we have a memoir here titled American Philosophy, A Love Story by John Cagg. And what I loved most about this one was just the discovery of this old unheated cabin filled with very old, very valuable books, and his efforts to sort of save and catalog and basically take care of these books and determine their value. And then we have one here titled A Degree of Mastery, A Journey Through Book Art Apprenticeship by Annie Trammell Wilcox. And this is a memoir as well about a woman who decides as a second career that she is going to take a course in book repair. And she goes on to have a career in the repair of books. And it's quite a fun little slim memoir just about books and the whole process that goes into repairing an old book. And we're at 22 minutes, so I think I'm going to stop there. When I decide to come back to these shelves, we will look at the NYRB classics there, as well as my few everymans I have. And I've got a couple Alberto Manguels and my Jean-Paul Sartre there. But we'll leave it at that for now. If you've enjoyed this little bookshelf tour, be sure to let me know. That way I can make it a priority to film more of it.